Is this too little too late in terms of the reputational damage that's already been done? I mean, this decision by the FAA was only taken after 40 other nations and other airlines had already taken similar steps precautionarily.
Well, they did, but they did on the basis of two airplanes that crashed, possibly for different reasons, possibly the same reason, mostly for the fact that the pilots weren't trained properly, probably. They had to do this. I think what's going to happen is they'll ground the airplanes. Boeing will have a software fix that smaller airlines can deal with, and we'll be back in the sky within 2 weeks.
What would have been the new evidence that was discovered that led to this decision then?
I think it was just the combination of finding out that, for example, probably the Ethiopian pilot wasn't properly trained. We know the Ethiopian pilot was alone in the cockpit. His co-pilot had 200 hours, which meant he was absolutely useless and shouldn't have been sitting there. So, and probably the same thing with Lion Air, which has an abominable history for safety. So I think the real issue here is doing something that smaller airlines, especially foreign airlines, can train through. Remember, U.S. carriers have been safe. Their pilots thought this airplane is safe. I agree with them. It's the rest of the world where we have an issue.
Mike, if you're thinking that they could be back in the air in 2 weeks' time, why didn't Boeing just ground the flights in the first place? It's not like the last time they had to ground the 787 Dreamliner and hurt their profit streamline at all.
Well, I don't think they had to. Here's the real issue. In the U.S., we have highly trained pilots. They all come out and say, this plane is fine. The real issue was the rest of the world, where we find out that carriers like Ethiopian will have pilots in the cockpit that really don't have enough training. So they're trying to do a software fix that will fix that issue itself.
So let's talk a little bit about the fact that China was the one who took the lead and they grounded their 737s first. We know that they tend to be a bit conservative when it comes to aviation safety, but at the same time, we can't help but wonder if there could have been some political reason given all of the tensions with the U.S. What do you think?
No, I think the Civil Aviation Administration of China did that entirely on the basis of safety. I don't think it had anything to do with trade issues. I think they made an internal decision to do that, whether you agree with it or not. But it was not one, I don't believe, had anything to do with trade. It had everything to do with their focus on safety.
Mike, I'm going to have to take issue with some of the points you made earlier about pilot training and safety records. Ethiopian Airlines actually has a pretty good safety record. We've also heard from the US Pilots Union saying that they have concerns over the potential safety of this aircraft. We've heard from the Flight Attendants Union saying that they would prefer the aircraft be grounded as a precautionary measure. There's also the fact that a great deal of Asian as well as emerging market airlines hire pilots that were trained in the US or are American or come from Western training. So, you know, is there a fact that even if it is an issue with pilot training, that there's something that has gone wrong with this type of aircraft and with a particular function that we're talking about that does go back on responsibility to Boeing?
Well, first of all, U.S. pilots found that there was an issue with this autopilot system, and we addressed that. Secondly, foreign pilots who work for carriers globally, they're trained under that airline's own standards. And as far as Ethiopian goes, I'm sorry. If you have a pilot in that cockpit with only 200 hours in the sky, that's not safe. I don't care how many pilots they train. That's a major problem. So in the U.S., we didn't have a problem. Elsewhere in the world, we did. It gets back to pilot training.
Mike, I want to focus on the business implications for Boeing then, because as we know, the 737 family is the workhorse. It makes up a huge component of their business. There's large amounts of orders that are still outstanding. We've already heard from the likes of Norwegian Air saying that they will be seeking compensation. Is this going to be very damaging for Boeing, as we'd expect other airlines around the world would be seeking compensation for how long their fleet is grounded for this reason?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be every country in the world has lawyers. They're all working tonight. And yes, the fact is some airlines have been damaged by this, and Boeing is responsible for it. I mean, that's the only way you can get to it. So it will be a hit. But in terms of orders canceled, I don't think that's in the cards, except maybe Lion Air. But overall, I don't think we see any real pushback there. But as far as what you're saying is, will this be a hit on Boeing's bottom line? Bank on it.
What about the wider ramification to other suppliers to Boeing?
Well, if major orders are cut, it would be a big issue for engine manufacturers, component manufacturers. But I don't think there's going to be any major cuts. Because first of all, Airbus, which is the only other game in town, They're backlogged forever. So they don't have a lot of capacity to pick up a huge cancellation of Boeing orders as much as they'd like to. China has no airplane on the horizon right now that's ready for the next 5 years. So we're down to you do deal business with Boeing or you don't have any airplanes.
And of course, we can't forget the travelers as well, air passengers. How are they going to be impacted across the world as a lot of these countries are now grounding the 737s?
Well, that's kind of the good news. Globally, there's less than 350 of these out of 22,000 airplanes and airline fleets. In China, what they're grounding is about 1.5% of their fleet. In the U.S., it's about 1%. So it's not going to be a big hit to the air transportation system because there just aren't a lot of these airplanes in the sky.
Yeah, Mike, and that goes back to the point of what harm would have been done given that it's 3% of mainland fleet at the major American carriers, right, if they were to have grounded a couple of days earlier. But I'm wondering, the fact that the CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, personally called President Trump to try and reassure him about the safety of their fleet, are the political implications of this too close, that the FAA is too close with Boeing?
No, I don't think so. The people in the middle ranks of the FAA, they're non-political. So I think they're the ones that call the shots. So I don't think that's the case. Are there political ramifications? Of course there are, because the head of the FAA is a political appointee. But overall, I think in this case, it had to do with the fact that here in the U.S., we didn't have a safety problem. The rest of the world did, and that's what the FAA was working off of. And now that's going to get fixed.